before any thought, before any explanation. There's something your body already knows. It isn't an idea. It isn't a conclusion. It's a feeling that shows up without warning. A tightness, a contraction, a weight you carry without really knowing where it came from. You could be lying down. You can be sitting. You can be in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, sunlight coming through the window in the most normal way, and still something tighten in your chest or your stomach or your jaw. Somewhere you barely noticed before, but now it's tense, always tense. Like your body is waiting for something that might never come. Stay with me in this video. By the end of it, this feeling will have a name, and once it has a name, it loses some of its power. This video is going to be long, and I need you to understand why, because what we're about to explore here wasn't built in a day. It was built slowly, over years, in small moments you probably don't even remember anymore. Moments that felt insignificant at the time, but quietly taught your inner system something very specific about what happens when you try to take up more space in the world. And to undo that, or at least begin to undo it, we have to move slowly too. Not because I want you to suffer longer, but because quick understanding doesn't change anything. You've read the short articles, you've watched the 5-minute videos, you've saved the quotes that felt powerful for 48 hours and then faded. What actually changes something is different. It's slower, it's more honest. So stay. No rush. If at any point something tightens in your chest while you're listening, pay attention to that. That tightness is information. It's your system telling you that something true just got touched. Let me introduce you to someone. His name is Daniel. Daniel is 32. He works at a tech company in a city he didn't choose, but stayed in because life just unfolded in a way that felt easy enough to accept. He's good at what he does. Everyone knows it. His co-workers know it. His manager knows it. He delivers. He solves problems. He's the kind of person who shows up to meetings with the right answer at the right time. But there's something Daniel can't really explain. Every time a bigger opportunity shows up in his life, a promotion, a high visibility project, a chance to be seen, to take up a space he technically earned a long time ago, something happens. Not in his mind, in his body. It starts in his stomach. A contraction he's never called by its real name because he's always had reasonable explanations ready. I'm just tired. The timing's not right. It's not the right moment yet. I should prepare more first. He has a whole collection of explanations like this, all of them logical, all of them sounding true when he tells them to himself. But the body doesn't lie as easily as the mind. And Daniel's body, every time a real opportunity arrives, shuts down. It was a Wednesday in March, the kind of day with nothing special about it. White sky outside, office AC humming, the steady sound of keyboards and low conversations blending into that background noise you stop hearing after a while. Daniel was at his desk at 8:40 when his phone buzzed. A message from his manager, short, direct. "Daniel, can you stop by my office at 11? Want to talk about the leadership project opening in Q2. Daniel read it, then read it again. And before any conscious thought, before any words formed in his mind, his stomach tightened, fast, sharp, like something inside him just closed without asking permission. He set the phone down, looked back at his computer screen. The spreadsheet was still open. The numbers were the same as before the message. The office sounded exactly the same. Nothing had changed in the outside world in the last 45 seconds, but something had changed inside Daniel. His right shoulder had lifted slightly. His jaw was tighter. His breathing had become shallow, high in his chest, as if his body had decided on its own. Better not breathe too deeply right now. Better stay small. Better not take up too much space. Not even inside yourself. He stared at the spreadsheet for maybe 2 minutes. He didn't read anything, didn't process anything. His eyes moved across the cells, but his mind was somewhere else. Not a specific place, but a diffuse space filled with fragments of possibility. Not even in words, just pressure, background noise, that low, constant tension that lives behind your sternum, the one you learn to call by 100 different names, so you never have to call it what it actually is. At 8:53 he replied, "Sure, I'll be there." And then he spent the next 2 hours doing everything except preparing for that conversation. First, email. A co-worker had sent a report for review. Daniel opened it, read it with a level of attention it probably didn't deserve, wrote a detailed response. Then he went to the break room, not because he was thirsty. His body just needed to move, needed to do something with all that energy circulating with nowhere to go. When he came back, it was almost 10. He opened a new browser tab, searched how to prepare for a promotion conversation, clicked an article, read 2 paragraphs, closed it, opened another, read the title and subtitles, closed that one too. His jaw was still tight. He only noticed when he rubbed his face without thinking and felt it, that subtle hardness in the muscles, almost invisible from the outside, but something you carry all day, like a weight too light to call heavy and too heavy not to feel. At 10:48, Daniel went to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror, not the vague morning glance. This time he really looked, and what he saw was someone contained, like something inside him wanted to expand, and something older, bigger, was holding it back. Not with force, with the quiet of someone who learned very early that expanding too much comes with a cost. He took a breath, straightened his shirt, and walked to his manager's office. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. His manager was direct. A technical leadership role was opening. Daniel was the natural candidate. They wanted his answer by the end of the week. It was concrete, real, exactly the kind of opportunity Daniel had imagined late at night dozens of times. He listened, thanked him, said he needed time to think. Walking back to his desk, sunlight coming through the hallway windows, something strange happened. A moment of clarity, too quick to last. He realized he didn't need to think at all. The answer was already there. He wanted it, and then, almost immediately, as like that clarity triggered an alarm, his stomach tightened again, stronger this time. Have you ever been there? Not necessarily in a promotion conversation, maybe in a relationship, when someone got too close and you pulled back without meaning to, maybe in a project, when the idea was good, the timing was right. And still you waited, and then waited a little more. What happened to Daniel in that hallway? That 1 second of clarity swallowed by contraction? You probably know that feeling in some way. If you do, stay here. Because what triggered that alarm in Daniel's body wasn't weakness. It wasn't lack of preparation. It was something much older, much more intelligent than that. Something built to protect you. And for a very important period of your life, it did exactly that. The problem is, the world changed. You grew, and that protection system never got the memo. Daniel went back to his desk and froze, not physically frozen. His hands were moving, he was typing, his eyes were on the screen. From the outside, he looked like someone working, but inside, there was a kind of paralysis that doesn't have a common name, a feeling of being suspended between 2 states. Who he was before his manager's message, and who he would be after saying yes. The problem was, after saying yes felt impossible to fully imagine. He consciously tried to picture it. Him in a leadership role, him running meetings, him with more responsibility, more pay, more space. The images came, but they never came alone. They always arrived with a shadow attached, an image of something going wrong, of someone realizing he wasn't actually good enough, of a specific, humiliating moment when the mask would fall and everyone would see what was underneath. He didn't think this through in full sentences. It was faster than that, almost instant. The good image would appear and the contraction would dissolve it before it had time to settle. So he'd go back to the spreadsheet, back to email, back to anything that wasn't the decision waiting at the end of the week, like a deadline he never asked for. There's a name for this inside the body, not the clinical name, not the name from textbooks. The human name, the one that makes sense when you're lying in bed at 11 p.m., staring at the ceiling, feeling like the day moved too fast and too slow at the same time. We call it an alarm. And Daniel's alarm wasn't new. It didn't start that Wednesday in March. It started much earlier, so early that even if he tried, he wouldn't be able to pinpoint the exact moment. Because alarms like this don't have a single origin. They have a construction, a history, a pile of moments stacking up until the system learns one very specific thing. Growing is dangerous, not in words, never in word. The body doesn't think in language. It thinks in sensations, in patterns, in associations recorded before you could analyze anything, before you had the tools to question what you were learning. Daniel's body had learned that taking up too much space, being too visible, too successful, standing out too much, came with pain. So it built a system to prevent that. An efficient system, quiet, almost invisible, an alarm. To understand where Daniel's alarm came from, you have to go back with him, not to a dramatic moment, not to a movie scene with obvious conflict and a clear resolution. You have to go back to the small moments, the ones no one photographs, the ones no one brings up at family gatherings, but the body recorded them with incredible precision. Daniel was 11 when his father got promoted. That doesn't sound important, but stay with me. His father was a logistics technician, worked long hours, came home late, carried that kind of exhaustion in his shoulders that kids recognize long before they understand it. When the promotion came, there was a week of celebration at home, special dinners, phone calls to relatives. His father lighter than Daniel had ever seen him, but after a few weeks, something changed. His father started coming home even later. Conversations got shorter. There was a new tension Daniel couldn't name, but could feel at the dinner table, in the way adults avoided looking directly at each other, in how conversations ended too soon, in the silence that lingered after the plates were cleared. Months later, Daniel overheard something he wasn't meant to hear. His mother on the phone, speaking quietly. He changed after he moved up. I don't know if it was good for her. Daniel was 11. He didn't understand everything, but his body understood enough. His body heard moving up changes things. Moving up creates distance. Moving up has a cost that isn't written anywhere. That moment alone wouldn't have built the whole alarm. It was that moment and his 7th grade math teacher who used high-performing students as examples in a way that stirred jealousy from classmates. Daniel was good at math, and he quickly learned that being visibly good at something came with a social cost no one warned you about. It was that moment and the time he presented a school project with genuine confidence and someone laughed, probably not out of cruelty. But the laugh stayed. It stayed in his body, in his shoulders, in the way he started presenting himself after that. Smaller, faster, less confident than he actually was. It was that moment and his first job where he shared a new idea in a meeting, and his boss dismissed it in front of everyone with a briefness that hurt more than it should have. Not because the boss was cruel, but because Daniel's system was already sensitive to that pattern, already expecting it. Each of those moments alone would have been insignificant. Together, they were a school that taught Daniel's inner system a simple equation. The more visible you become, the more exposed you become. And exposure is risk, and risk must be avoided. So the alarm kept getting calibrated, adjusted, refined, until it became automatic, until it didn't need a real threat anymore. The possibility of a threat was enough. A message at 8:40 on a random Wednesday was enough. An opportunity appearing was enough for the system to react before Daniel had any chance to decide. And there's something important here, something you may need to hear differently than you're used to. Daniel's alarm wasn't a flaw. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't self-sabotage in the sense of him doing something wrong. It was protection. It was a system that once looked at the world around an 11-year-old boy and said, "I need to keep you safe." And it did the best it could with the information it had. The problem isn't that the alarm existed. The problem is that it was never updated. Daniel grew. The world around him changed. The rules changed. The visibility that once felt dangerous is now necessary for the life he wants. But the alarm doesn't know that. It's still operating on information from an afternoon decades ago, in a kitchen that doesn't exist anymore, overhearing a conversation an 11-year-old shouldn't have faced alone. Can you recognize this in your own system? It doesn't have to be the same story. It doesn't have to look the same. But somewhere in you there's probably a version of this, a moment or a series of moments where your system learned that growing, standing out, being seen came with a cost that didn't feel worth paying. You don't need to answer out loud, but if something showed up while you were listening, an image, a sensation, a name, a face, Pay attention to that. That's the point of origin, not so you relive it, not so you blame anyone, but so you understand where that voice came from, the one that whispered, "Don't go," in Daniel's hallway, where the contraction came from, because when you know where something came from, it loses a little of its power over you, just a little, but that little matters. Daniel spent the whole week in that suspended state. He functioned normally, or what looked like normal, delivered his work, attended meetings, answered emails. On the outside, he was the same Daniel as always, competent, present, reliable. Inside, there was constant noise, not organized thoughts, noise, fragments of worst-case scenarios, quick comparisons with co-workers who seem more prepared, random flashes of old memories without context, a diffuse sense that something in him still wasn't ready, maybe would never be ready, maybe ready was a state other people reached, and for him, it always stayed one step ahead. At night, his sleep was the same as always. It would go only so far, then stall. He'd wake up before his alarm, shoulders tight, jaw slightly clenched, like his body had spent the entire night holding something. On Thursday during lunch, a co-worker asked about the role. "You gonna take it?" Daniel gave a vague answer, something about still thinking. The co-worker nodded, said it was a great opportunity, and the conversation moved on. But the question stayed in Daniel's body for hours. "You gonna take it?" A simple question, and he didn't have a simple answer. Not because he didn't know what he wanted, he did, but between what he wanted and the act of saying yes, there was that space, the space where the alarm lived, where the contraction waited, where that silent door was always ready to close. Friday morning, deadline day. Daniel sat at his desk holding his phone. The reply would be short, 2 sentences. "Yes, I accept. Let's move forward." He held the phone for 7 minutes. And during those 7 minutes, the alarm was fully active, heat in his shoulders, tension in his jaw, a narrow kind of focus that blurred the rest of the office, like his field of vision had shrunk to include only the phone and the message not yet written. Then Daniel took a breath, an involuntary one, the kind your body takes when tension hits a point that needs release. And in that breath, for a fraction of a second, the alarm lowered its volume. Just a little, but enough. Enough for him to type the 2 sentences and send them. His manager's reply was immediate, positive, enthusiastic. Daniel read it, set the phone down, and waited for something inside him to change, some rush of excitement, some relief that matched the moment. What came instead was different, a strange silence, filled with something he still couldn't name, a mix of something like satisfaction, and something like terror, and something very old, beginning, very slowly, to move, as if a door that had been closed for a very long time had opened just a crack, but the light coming through it was real. There's a name for what kept closing Daniel's door. Not the clinical name, not the one you'd find in textbooks or diagnoses. The human name. The one that makes sense when you're alone. When the day is over. When the silence arrives and you finally slow down enough to feel what you've been carrying. The shadow has a name. And when something has a name, it loses power. Its name is the invisible. The invisible is the part of Daniel that learned over years that the safest way to exist was not to be seen too much, not to stand out too much, not to take up too much space, not to grow in a way that would draw attention, create expectations, build a version of himself he would then have to sustain. And if he couldn't sustain it, it would confirm what the alarm had always believed, that underneath his competence, there was something too fragile to expose. The invisible wasn't cowardly. That needs to be clear. The invisible was intelligent, strategic. It was the most efficient solution a young system could find to a real problem. How do you survive in an environment where growth has a cost, where being seen carries risk, where exposure has a history of hurting? The invisible helped Daniel spend years being the perfect number 2, always present, always delivering, always reliable, but never in front, never at the center, never in the place where the light hits directly. For a while, this worked. For a while, the invisible kept him safe. The problem is, safe and alive are not the same thing. Every shadow protects you from something specific. In the case of the invisible, what it was protecting Daniel from feeling was this: the possibility of trying fully and not being enough, not failure itself. Daniel knew failure. He had failed at small things, and survive. What the invisible was protecting him from was more precise, more ancient. It was the humiliation of trying with everything, of exposing himself completely, of letting others see how much he cared, how much he believed in himself, and then being reduced, dismissed, becoming living proof that his belief in himself had been somehow an illusion. That specific moment, at some point in Daniel's history, the invisible decided that moment was unbearable, that it would be better to never reach it than to reach it and discover it was true. So it built an entire architecture around that protection. Procrastination was part of that architecture, the tendency to prepare endlessly, to wait for the perfect moment, to always have one more thing to do before acting. All of that were walls, built with incredible skill to keep Daniel in a space where he would never have to face the question the invisible feared most. Are you enough? But here's the turning point. And pay attention here, because this sits at the center of everything we're building together in this video. Fighting the invisible doesn't work. Not because you lack willpower, but because the invisible doesn't respond to force. It responds to threat. When you try to push yourself harshly out of the pattern, when you force yourself toward what you fear, the invisible doesn't step back, it escalates. An alarm doesn't quiet down because you shout that it shouldn't be on. An alarm quiets down when the system that created it receives new information that says, the world changed. The rules changed. What used to be dangerous is now safe. And you don't convince the body of that with arguments. You convince the body with experience. Small ones, repeated ones, safe enough for the system to process without collapsing. That's why willpower alone doesn't solve this. You've probably tried willpower, pushed yourself toward opportunities, forced yourself to say yes, made yourself show up, and maybe it worked for a while, but it was expensive. It cost you in ways that don't show immediately. It shows later, in exhaustion, in the need to withdraw, in the period of inertia that comes after forced action. Like the system needs time to recover from being pushed beyond what it was ready for. That isn't weakness. It's mechanics. The way out isn't through force, it's through widening your window. There's an archetype that stands opposite the invisible. Not opposite in the sense of perfection, not someone fearless, never hesitant, never feeling that contraction before something big. That person doesn't exist. Any version that promises that is selling you a fantasy. The opposite of the invisible is the present. The present is not someone who never feels the alarm. It's someone who feels the alarm clearly, fully, without pretending it isn't there, and acts anyway. Not because the fear disappeared, but because they learned to tell the difference between an old alarm and a real threat. The present knows when the body is reacting to a memory and when it's reacting to actual danger, and that difference changes everything. But the present has a small flaw. It has to. Without it, it wouldn't be human. It would be a character. The present's flaw is this. Sometimes it acts before it feels completely ready. Sometimes it says yes while there's still doubt, while the alarm is still quietly active, while absolute certainty hasn't arrived. And sometimes that has a cost. Sometimes it means stepping forward before having every resource it wanted. But the present has learned something the invisible still doesn't know. That completely ready is a state that doesn't exist. That preparation has a point of diminishing returns. After a certain point, more preparation isn't preparation anymore. It's procrastination wearing better clothes. And that acting with 80% readiness and 20% discomfort creates more real learning than waiting forever for the 100% that never comes. Here's something I want you to reflect on. Think of an area in your life where the invisible is active right now. It doesn't have to be work. It could be a relationship, a project, something you've postponed for so long you don't even remember when you started postponing it. Now ask yourself, what exactly is the invisible protecting you from feeling there? Not the outcome you fear, the feeling, the specific bodily sensation that would exist if you truly tried and it didn't work. Is it humiliation, abandonment, the confirmation of something you're afraid might be true about you? You don't have to solve it right now. Just naming it already changes something, because Because once you know what the system is trying to avoid, you can begin to have a different conversation with it. Not a confrontation, a recognition. I know what you're trying to do, and I understand why you learned to do it, but the rules have changed. Daniel didn't discover this in a moment of enlightenment. He didn't wake up one morning with everything resolved, the alarm silent, the invisible retired. It wasn't like that. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, 3 weeks after he accepted the promotion. He was in the middle of a meeting that was going well, genuinely well, better than he expected, and he noticed a moment where he could contribute something important, something he was clear about, something he knew, and he felt the alarm, fast, familiar. That contraction in his stomach he knew by heart, but this time, he did something different. Instead of pulling back immediately, instead of letting the moment pass, he stayed with the sensation for 1 second, just one. He took a small breath, not dramatic, nothing anyone in the room could notice, just enough to create a millimeter of space between the alarm and his action. And then he spoke. His voice sounded slightly different than usual, more direct, taking up more space. Not perfect. There was a hint of hesitation at the beginning. The invisible still there, still active, but quieter than before. The room listened. People responded well, and Daniel stayed with that response for a moment, letting his system register it. This happened. You spoke, and the world didn't collapse. It was small, just a moment in a room on an ordinary afternoon, but the body recorded it, and the body always remembers. The body always remembers. And that's exactly why training works. Not because it changes what you think about yourself, but because it slowly builds new experiences the body can use as reference. Experiences that speak in the only language the alarm truly understands. A quiet, steady signal that says, this is safe, this is different from the past. This can be attempted, not all at once, not dramatically, brick by brick, moment by moment, with the patience of someone who understands that a system built over years won't be rebuilt in a week. But it will be rebuilt. Small steps are what change everything. This practice has 3 movements. 3, not 10, not 20, not a long list of habits you'll try for 3 days and abandon. 3 simple, specific movements that work together over 30 days to create a new relationship between you and the alarm, not the silence of the alarm, a different relationship with it, because the goal isn't to never feel the contraction again. The goal is to recognize it without being ruled by it, to feel the alarm and still exist, still breathe, still act, still take up the space that belongs to you, even while the alarm is active. That's different from being fearless. That's different from pretending you don't feel anything. This is real, human, and possible. First movement, lower the volume. The first movement isn't about acting differently. It's about noticing before acting. For the first 10 days, the only goal is this. When the alarm activates, you pause for 1 second and name what you feel in your body. Not in complex thoughts, in simple, physical words. Not, I'm anxious. That's an interpretation. My jaw is tight. My breathing is shallow in my chest. My shoulders are lifted. This difference seems small. It isn't. When you name the physical sensation instead of the emotional label, you create a tiny but real separation between you and the alarm. You stop being the alarm and become someone observing it, and your nervous system responds differently to that. Not instantly, but over 10 days, you'll begin to notice something subtle. The alarm loses its absolute quality. It stops feeling like you are in danger and starts feeling like a part of you is reacting. A part that can be acknowledged without being blindly obeyed. 3 simple lines you can write in a note. My stomach is tight. This is the alarm. The alarm is not reality. Simple, specific, physical. Second movement, mapping the route. From day 10 to day 20, you add the second movement. Once a day, in a calm moment, maybe at night, maybe in the morning, you ask a simple question. When did I first learn this was dangerous? Not to relive it, not to suffer, just to locate it. Because the invisible has an origin, a series of moments that taught it how to operate. And when you locate those moments, they lose their status as absolute truth and become what they actually are, a story. A story that made sense at the time, but doesn't have to be the script for your whole life. You don't need the exact memory. Sometimes identifying a general period is enough for the system to begin updating. 3 simple lines for this step. I learned that growing was dangerous when, back then it made sense because, but today the context is different because, writing these once a day for 10 days does something motivation never can. It begins updating the internal file. It tells your system that the information it's using to calibrate the alarm has an expiration date. Third movement, acting like the present. From day 20 to day 30, you add the third movement. Once a day, in an ordinary situation, you act like the present would, not pretending the alarm isn't there, with the alarm active, with the contraction present, with all the familiar sensations, you act anyway. Not a big gesture. It might be sending a message you've been avoiding, speaking once in a meeting where you'd usually stay quiet, saying yes to something small you would normally sidestep. And then, this part is critical, you stay with what happens. You don't rush to the next task. You pause for 30 seconds and let your body process. This happened, I acted, and what happened next? Most of the time, nothing catastrophic happened. The world kept going, and your body needs to record that. It needs to accumulate evidence that action doesn't automatically lead to the outcome the alarm predicted. That accumulation is the training, not insight, not intellectual understanding. Repeated bodily evidence. 30 days, one movement at a time. 3 months after accepting the promotion, Daniel was leading a meeting that would have felt impossible 2 months earlier. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the invisible showed up, still whispering that retreat would be safer. But something had changed. There was a quality of presence that hadn't been there before, an ability to stay inside discomfort without immediately escaping, a familiarity with the alarm that made it less absolute, not silent. Recognizable. I know you, I know where you came from, and I'm still here. It wasn't victory, it was process. It was the body learning a new language, slowly, with stumbles, with setbacks during harder weeks, but with one difference that changed everything. He knew its name now, and when you know the name, you gain a choice that didn't exist before. Not the choice to never feel the alarm, but the choice to recognize it as an alarm, not a prophecy, as the signal of an old system trying to do its job, not the final voice about who you are or what's possible for you. The fear that paralyzes you didn't come from nowhere. It was built, learned, calibrated through real experiences at a time when you had fewer resources to process them. You are not broken. You are operating with a system that learned to protect you in the best way it knew how, a system that once made perfect sense. And now, with the awareness you have today, with the resources you have now, it can be updated. Not erased, not destroyed, updated, because your shadow is not your enemy. Your shadow is the part of you that tried to keep you safe when safety was what you needed most. And it deserves recognition before transformation. Recognition, not obedience. That's what this space is about, not escaping the shadow, but going down into it, lighting a small lamp and learning to see what has been waiting to be seen all along. Because the shadow has a name, and when something has a name, it loses power. If something you heard today touched a specific place in your body, if you recognize the invisible in yourself or some version of it, just stay with that for a moment. You don't need to fix anything right now. Just stay. And if you want, share in the comments, not what you think about this, but what you felt in your body while listening. Because sometimes naming it out loud is the first step toward the alarm beginning to quiet. You are not alone in this. You never were.